Now we're going to move on to the discussion part of our town hall. I'll begin by asking the panel a question, and I then really encourage people who are here live and those who are on Zoom to ask us questions. If you're here in person and you would like to ask a question, you can raise your hand. If you prefer your question be anonymous, which is completely fine, there's some index cards and pins up on the piano. You can get one, write down your question, and just place it back there, and I'll get it and read it out. On the Zoom, unfortunately, we can't put you up on a screen and have you ask. We just aren't that technologically advanced yet. So if you can type it into the chat, and if you want to include your name, that's great. And if you want it to be anonymous, that's fine as well. The one thing I do ask is if you ask a question, please do so in a kind manner towards the people here, as well as towards the Board of Education. That is something we've held up as what we want for this town hall to be. Now, that doesn't mean you can't ask questions about the Board of Education, what we think about something, anything like that, but let's not attack them today. That's not our goal. Instead, our goal is to have a discussion that helps educate our community and creates a vision for the future. So I'll ask the first question, and I'd love just a brief response from whoever on the panel would like to answer. I think that everyone in our audience and on the panel agrees that parenting is hard. It's just not easy. What I'd like to know from some of the parents up here is what are some of the additional challenges that you face parenting a child with special needs when it comes to their education? Who would like to begin?
Very briefly, I think that the most demoralizing aspect perhaps is when you encounter administrators or educators who, as Michael just mentioned, just write off your child. And if you, along the way of trying to give the best support and the best services to your kid, all of a sudden realize that maybe the system looks at him or her as just someone to warehouse for a number of years. I think that is probably the most demoralizing and difficult thing, to kind of pull yourself up by the bootstraps and find alternatives and find the best trajectory for your child. But I think that's pretty difficult.
My son is 6 years old and autistic, limited verbally. So the hardest part for me is the fear of trusting other people with him, because he won't be able to tell me how his day was. The month my son was diagnosed, he was 2 years old, we put our house up for sale and we did research, and we found Katona Lewisboro, because we wanted, just the research we had done, we wanted to put him in the safest, best place he could be. So when I heard these stories that we discussed earlier, it really gutted me. Thank you.
Hi. Yeah, I guess just following up on what Matthew just said, I attended Katona Lewisboro schools from kindergarten until graduation, and never in a million years did I think that I would be afraid to send my child there. When my husband and I had the opportunity to move into a house in Katona, I was like, yeah, this is great. We're going to send our kids to Katona Lewisboro. It's going to be great. Little did I know I would have a son who's autistic, and then that I would then learn that this was happening to students in our district. So the fear is huge, and something that our children are the most vulnerable. So I know every time I send him on the bus, something could happen to him, because he could have a meltdown, which he does often. He can't tell anybody why. He becomes erratic. And who knows what could happen. And he comes home and maybe he has a scratch or a bruise, or he's in a bad mood. And all I can do is wonder what happened today, what possibly could have happened. And I will never know. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not a parent, unfortunately. Haven't found the right woman yet. That being said, I always tell parents, one of the hardest things I tell them is, if you're helping your child at home and the school says he's doing well, you have to stop, because you're doing their job for them and letting them off the hook. And it's hard to tell parents, you have to let your child fail so the school will do what they're supposed to. But all the stuff you're doing at home is letting the child off the hook. And I heard a story last night from a prospective client. The girl, 8-year-old girl on the spectrum, average intelligence, had a complete meltdown. So they sent her to the hospital and strapped her to a gurney, even though the mother said not to. She got to the hospital covered in urine because she peed herself, because the school didn't listen to the mother. So these things happen way too often. And what people were saying, unfortunately, I've seen way too many school districts that blame the parents. I just came through a case, Hope knows the case, where the attorney said the parents were at fault. It was all their fault, and that the kid was making it up, and that the kid deserved what he got.
Before I ask another question, I'd like to know if anybody who is here in person has a question or something they would like to say. Raise your hand. Yes. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you, I think just to come up and take the microphone so that everybody can hear you.
Hi, I know you all too well. But this is my question. I too have been going to the Board of Ed for the last 3 years, trying to enact change here, which is very difficult. But part of what I'd like to see and understand is how we can actually get the board to include parents as part of the Board of Ed discussion, not just about finances. Because that's what I've heard, that mostly their responsibility when they respond to Erica or I has been that it really is outside of their purview and falls to the administration. But I know there are other school districts where things are done differently and parent concerns can be voiced and circulated. And I've yet to find an avenue to enact that change in the board, one that I'd desperately like to see, because I think there's a lot of issues that stem from a lack of understanding of what goes on between parents and students and teachers. And there's just a real disconnect, not intentionally, but the board's responsibility. They seem to sidestep that. So I'm curious what this group suggests we do to change that.
So without a doubt, there are school districts where there is a more collaborative dialogue. I spoke to a board member in a different school district who was shocked that there isn't yet a committee formed to deal with a lot of these issues, or at least to have an open dialogue about them. But to answer your question, I think at this point, the board has demonstrated a lack of desire to have the kind of collaborative dialogue that we want to figure out a common vision for a future that everyone feels they have a true stake in. And so from my perspective, the only way to create that kind of dialogue is to have the kind of board that is amenable to it. So we need new candidates for the board. We need to consistently replace board members in the upcoming election and every election after that until we have the kind of board that we feel comfortable having, that wants to have a conversation with us. There's nothing wrong with dialogue. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. There's nothing wrong with being curious about what your community members are bringing to you. We don't need to have this arm's length arrangement. And I think we need to, what do they say? Every community deserves the government that they have. We need to have the elected officials that we actually want to have.
I would answer that from two different perspectives. I think the first is we need to understand that we are the stakeholders. We are the taxpayers. We are the parents. Some of us have been children going through the school district. We all have a say, and our say, the greatest power that any citizen has, is the right to vote. The school board elections typically are very small turnouts. The school board's responsibility is to oversee the educational system in the districts that they represent. That doesn't mean that they set the curriculum. It doesn't mean that they set the budget, but they have oversight over all of that. Sadly, this board has decided not to live up to its responsibility for proper oversight. Sadly, this board has ignored multiple attempts over numerous years to engage in truly collaborative dialogue with they're the representatives of us. They don't want to listen to us. They don't want to dialogue with us. They don't want to work with us. So how is it that we can have the kind of educational system that we want if they're not even willing to listen to us, work with us? So we truly believe at this point in time that people need to get out and vote. We need to get candidates who will not accept the status quo. This meeting, we wanted them there because they keep telling us they cannot have this collaborative dialogue. We wanted this here with them tonight. So if they do not want to do their jobs, then we need to run candidates and we need to replace them. And we need everybody's help to help us canvass and support the candidates that will create the kind of humane changes that are direly necessary in our community. And I hope everyone contributes to this effort.
Thanks, Mark. The president of the Board of Education has been there 12 years. Some have been there 9 years. So how are they going to go and say that the reading program is broken? They have no motivation to do that. It would be an indictment on themselves. The same thing if they say, you know, we handled the abuse in 2019, 2020 incorrectly. That's an indictment upon themselves. The same reason why they can't even say, we're sorry, we made a mistake about not notifying the family on the 30 restraints. If you watch these board meetings, there's only one trustee, Ms. Schneier, who's asking meaningful questions during the board. 6 versus 1 is not going to work. So I fully, wholeheartedly agree with what Oksana and Mark just said. We need more people to run. These need to be competitive elections, and the community needs to be more interested. Thank you.
I'll just add to that quickly that part of the reason that we created this town hall was to model the type of communication and open dialogue that we would like to see from the board, and giving them the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps they don't really understand what we're looking for, and hopefully this could be a model for them so that they can do something like this in the future. And if not, definitely let's elect some new folks. All right, another question.
Hi. I just want all of you to know that parents of special ed students in this district are supported. You're not alone. You have a big community that supports you, a growing community. And I want to just mention something. I was at the last Board of Ed meeting, and after most of the parents left, the board was still in discussion. Oh, sorry. Okay. And, you know, the Board of Ed members are sort of talking to themselves and hurt feelings, a lot of hurt feelings about, you know, how things were discussed with them and not really understanding why people were angry, why people were afraid. And one of the board members even said, he seemed to convey that only the parent of a child who is questioning their treatment can speak or should be speaking. And this was unreal to hear. He complained that in hearing all the parents speak, that, quote, much of the discussion and the examples is not their child. It's, I heard that, or my kid was here and did fine, but I'm very concerned that I heard all this horrible stuff. It would be most helpful to speak of their own personal experience. He continued, quote, it has to be my kid. Here's what I think happened. He said, quote, it's not appropriate to talk about it if it's not your kid. This was incredulous to me. I played the tape several times to just read it over, you know, hear it over and over because I couldn't believe it. You know, are we supposed to only care about ourselves and our own? Absolutely not. And I just, you know, it's unacceptable. When something happens to one, it happens to all. And we support you. You are not alone. And we are hoping for change to work together. Thank you.
Yeah, come on up. So hand this to Hope and let her respond, and then ask your question. All
I just wanted to say, I think that the board member who made those statements, and I agree with you, they were very angering to me because it's evidence that the Board of Ed or certain members of the Board of Ed and possibly certain members of the administration, I'm not sure, they don't see this as a civil rights issue, and it is. So let's take, for example, George Floyd, a Black person who was murdered by a cop. And people were furious and they felt unsafe and they protested. And now we look at this situation. Another person of a marginalized community, an autistic person, was abused. And my son is autistic. And what happened to him was a civil rights violation. And I have every right to be angry and to be scared and to speak up on that child's behalf because this is a civil rights issue. And I just think the fact that that was said by this board member is pure evidence that they don't see that this is a civil rights issue. And that is a huge problem.
I don't have a question, but I do have something to say. I can relate to what all these parents are going through because I have a brother who has autism, OCD, and many other things going on in his life. And it really saddens me, and I bet it saddens everyone else too, that we watch these children go through such things like they're being mistreated at school, whether it's by a student or a teacher. And I just want to say that I can relate to everything that parents must have been going through or probably have gone through the past, and they're probably still going through at the moment. And it's just really not okay. These kids are young. They don't deserve to be treated this way. They're just trying to be themselves. They're just trying to find themselves. And it just really breaks me.
I'm glad Hope mentioned the civil rights issue because COPA, which is a national organization, again, I'm on the board, Hope's a member, special ed attorneys and advocates who represent families, has always said it's a civil rights organization. And unfortunately, being active in the disability world, when you think of civil rights, disability is so far behind racial equality, gender equality, sexual orientation, than everything else. People talk about diversity and civil rights, and they talk about race, gender, sexual orientation, and they don't talk about disability. And as somebody pointed out, disability is the only group you could join at any time in your life. You could walk out and get hit by a car. You never know what your child is going to be when you have them, that there could be disabled. So, we have to remember this is a civil rights issue. And what Hope said about what happened in Minnesota, if you take this board member's attitude, there never would have been a civil rights movement. We would still have segregation. We would still have women not being allowed the same opportunities. And people with disabilities, including nonverbal autistics, can accomplish things. I know people who are nonverbal, who have master's degrees, who are in professional careers. Nonverbal doesn't mean lack of intelligence, which is something, again, I've never lived it as somebody on the spectrum, but there is an assumption that those who are nonverbal are less intelligent and less cognitively capable. From another point I wanted to add from an attorney's perspective, we go through these hearings. It costs the school districts a lot more to go through a hearing and lose than if they just give the parents what they need from the start. It works well for attorneys like me. We make money doing that, but the truth is, I just want a hearing. If the district had settled it from the start, they would have spent a lot less money. Now they paid my fees, their attorney's fees, and probably some other fees I don't even know about that they could have avoided and paid triple what they would have paid.
That's a really important point because I want to add to that because this really transcends, the financial stuff really transcends special education. It has dramatic impact on the whole district because as Michael just mentioned, of course, there's a tremendous amount of money the district spends to fight parents at every turn where they could just give parents what they want. And what they do by that is then create the kind of program that other districts or parents in other districts want to send their children to. And then it becomes accretive to the district to have that kind of reputation. It costs, easily 6 figures for a student to be sent to another district for a special needs program. It is very lucrative, most likely. And therefore, as opposed to siphoning that money out on legal fees, we could be enticing people to come here with the strength of our program. And lastly, on the same sort of issue of finances and legal expenses in our board, it is our sense that the board is very reliant at every turn on their attorneys. And again, we don't know what the expenses are associated with that. They do not appear to be good stewards of our tax dollars in that respect. I think this could be significantly better spent on the needs of our children, not just special education children, but children in general, and have a much more constructive relationship between parents and the board and the district.
I don't think most parents know that when you go to a hearing, the cost of the court reporter and the hearing officer is paid by the district. Because districts have more money than parents, regardless of right or wrong, the parents always pay this district always pays the cost of the court reporter and the hearing officer. If a parent wins, they get their fees back from the district. If a district wins, they don't get their fees back from the parents, since again, parents don't have that kind of money. The only way a parent can be forced to pay a district's fees is if the case was so frivolous that it was obvious that there was no case.
I have a follow-up question for you, Michael, and maybe Hope and anybody else. So our district has 2 attorneys. They have one attorney that handles almost everything, and then another attorney specifically for special ed. I'm curious is this the norm? Is it a little bit or a lot unusual? And when we look at that as far as legal fees are concerned, is it beneficial to have 2 separate attorneys, or is it better to have one who handles all legal issues for the district?
In my experience, some firms have one, some have 2. Some school districts have a separate firm called a bond counsel, but they only handle bonds. What's strange is, and I've talked about this with Hope, the firm that does a lot of the general stuff, they do special ed as well. Because if I'm correct, Katona Lewisboro has Ingram and Smith for general stuff, and they have, what is it? I forgot the name. Pettigrew. There's too many partners for special ed. So, and both firms do special ed. So I'm not sure why there are 2 firms. I've seen this in other districts. I generally, as an attorney, deal with the ones who do special ed. You'd have to look at the retainers and the hourly rates to figure out if it's cost effective.
But it is 2 different retainers in addition to all the billable hours, so.
Oh, no, I was just agreeing with you. The point that the firm that handles general counsel for our district is Ingram and Smith. They are a special education firm. They do have attorneys that specialize in special education, but they use a separate firm, Pettigrew, Waxman, I forget all the partners, up in, I think it's Hopewell Junction, just for special ed. So I'm curious about that as well. I don't know the reasoning behind it, but most certainly that is 2 retainer agreements, 2 hourly fees that they're paying. Why? We don't know.
It does handle a number of districts.
Deb, are there any questions in the Zoom chat? Okay, before I ask more questions, is there anyone else who has a question at the moment from the audience here? Okay. I encourage you, both people here and people on the Zoom, if you have questions, to please ask, because the goal of this is to be a community forum. All right. I'm just going to put that there for a second. I want to actually ask a question about looking forward and what we'd like to see. One of the things that SIA has been advocating for is a comprehensive review of the special education department. And I'd like to have anybody on the panel who wants to talk about it explain exactly what that means and why.
When we talk about an independent audit, what we are looking for is to understand exactly how does the special education operate, both from a financial level, also an operational level. So let's take that first level would be, How is it that the school district looks at the students and assesses the students' needs to see if there is something that stands out? For example, during the pandemic lockdown, funds have been allocated, I think they ended this year, to provide mental health treatment for children who have experienced anxiety, trauma, depression from the pandemic, not being able to go to school and all the other parts associated with that. To the best of my knowledge, our school district has nothing of its kind to systematically look at whether or not any of the students qualify, nor have I seen anything provided to any parent that this should be something that is available to the students. So if we talked about the reading program, if a child is struggling to read, at what point does an assessment process begin and how does it begin? We're then going to look at the assessment level. Who does the assessment and what types of assessments are done, whether they be neuropsychological evaluations, the psychoeducational evaluations, behavioral evaluations. I can speak from personal experience with one of our children. They're supposed to have a behavioral program. They did not have, or they still do not have, somebody who is licensed and qualified to do these evaluations, provide these evaluations. So you ask yourself, how is that even possible? For several years? I'm sorry, I have a hard time understanding that. Then they come to the point where now there's feedback with the parents. Most of the parents, including myself as a psychologist, did not know what all of our rights were. And to then be told what we should and should not do and accept and not accept, we found out that we could actually ask for more. We can reject it. So they do not really let the parents know what should be done, what your rights are, what could be offered in addition. Then there are the services they implement, whether they be supports in the classroom, they could be supports outside the classroom, they could be self-contained classrooms. Who are the people that are doing this? What types of training do they have? What types of continuous training do they have? So we have asked that the school district find some groups who can come in and can do a comprehensive evaluation of all aspects of this so that we can look at what are the finances involved, what is the training involved, what are the services that are involved, do they make sense, do they work? To date, we have not received any positive communication from the school district that they are in the slightest bit interested in approaching this. And that's problematic because our personal experiences here and the experiences of people who have spoken to us have shown us for years this system has major gaps and problem areas.
To add to that, so there is the social emotional component of education, there's the educational or the academic component of education, there's the safety component of education. I think Mark covered kind of a lot of the social emotional questions related to that, but also from an academic standpoint, what are the markers for success of special education? No one has been able to answer this question for me. For the general population, it's clear we have SAT scores, we have all kinds of ways to measure academic success. How do we do it for special education students? We haven't been able to get an answer to that. Furthermore, in a conversation with the head of special education, was she not only unable to describe the special education program to us, she wasn't able or wasn't willing to name a special education approach or an approach that this program takes. So it is highly opaque, the entire process, and keeps parents very much in the dark about a lot of things. And as Mark mentioned, a lot of things are approached as, here's what we give you, or here's what you need to do, as opposed to here are the options, or here's how we can work together. Here are the different alternatives. Here are your rights. I also would love for Alexa, in terms of the vision, to talk about what she touched on in terms of the definition of abuse in an educational setting and what we would like to see there.
Thank you. Well, that's a great concern of mine, frankly, that there are a lot of holes kind of in the law, and I think that KLSD is not, it's not unusual what they do. They kind of, our policy very closely mirrors the language of the law. So it really matters. And basically, child abuse in an educational setting is defined really narrowly. It's only physical harm, death, or sexual abuse. So that means that, all the verbal abuse, all the emotional abuse, all the really sort of horrifying things that can and have been done to our kids, not necessarily here, but nationally, are just not necessarily special ed, but it's our special ed kids who can't go home and talk about it. That doesn't even fall within the purview of that law. Then the means for reporting is just not, set up to encourage reporting. And basically you have to fill out a very specific form, and you're supposed to bring it in person to the building superintendent, a building administrator, or to the superintendent. And so that building administrator then gets to decide whether or not there's reasonable suspicion. And then from there, whether or not to conduct an investigation. So you can see how there could be a situation in which the building administrator might not, have a vested interest in not finding reasonable suspicion, right? So if they feel that maybe the performance of their subordinates reflects poorly on them, or if perhaps even they might be involved in the allegation in some way. So if that happens, then it dies there, and no one ever learns about it, including the parents. So this is why I think that, we unfortunately are aware how common this is, and the rest of the world sort of, I think, it has really no idea, and it's because so much of it never leaves the building. And then I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say on that point, but that's a great concern for us. And may I just add one thing? Excuse me. That's a matter of the law, but there's policy. The policy can improve on the law, right? So we can have a more robust policy. We can choose to do that. And so I really think that that's something that, I'd love for everyone to talk about a little bit. People don't like to talk about this, but it's something that I think needs to be spoken about openly and advocated for.
The one piece that I just want to add to the conversation, again, I always take it from the literacy standpoint. Our special ed students with IEPs in our district, currently only about 1/3 of them can read on grade level. I find that horribly disturbing. I presented this at one of our last Board of Ed meetings, and our district was essentially, the response was meh, as though they've sort of thrown away the key on special education, and as though we would never expect our students with IEPs to ever read on grade level, when in fact, current science tells us 90 to 95% of all children can learn when they are offered an explicit and systematic approach. So that is a huge gap that we are currently at 1/3, whereas we could be at 90. And that's to say our general education is only at about 70%. But again, we're not where we need to be in any sense.
On the legal part, I lecture a lot about social emotional learning and how special ed is not just academics. Many people think it's just about academics. What you said about there not being in the law unless there's physical or sexual abuse, I think you said. There are laws against teachers who are verbally abusive to kids. I've seen cases where teachers curse kids out, insult them, insult their parents, and that's not allowed. But the laws do need to be stronger. And again, there is an issue in this country and all over. There's a big push on mental health, which one of you mentioned, that mental health is a huge issue, even before COVID. Now it's even more with all kids, not just kids with disabilities. Mental health services are a part of special ed, and many school districts don't want to address it. I hear many cases where the parents will say, if it's not my kid, it's not my problem. I don't want my tax dollars going to help. There was a case in California where parents had notes left on their door telling them to move. We don't want your autistic kid in town. I just found out a councilman, I'm from Somers, said Somers is not a place for autistic people. I've lived there my whole life. So, there's so much ignorance and so much policy to change, but people don't realize special ed is not just academics, as I lecture. They think it's just academics or it's people who are blind, deaf, or in a wheelchair. Most kids in wheelchairs don't need special ed. They need 504 accommodations. They're not looking for specialized instruction. They're looking for ramps and bathroom access. I always say legally, if you're going to have a disability, being blind is the best disability because there are so many cutouts in the law for the blind community that no other disability gets. But the blind get set asides and no one else gets because they've had an organized lobby for so long, and people understand blindness. They don't understand autism. And the truth is, what you were saying about psychoeducational or neuropsychological evaluations, I always tell parents, whatever you're going to get from the district is they're going to know what they want before they find it. A district psychoeducational is usually not worth the paper it's printed on. You want a neuropsychological IE, and every parent should request an independent evaluation because trusting district evaluations is always a bad idea. And the trick that I learned years ago is if the evaluation says recommendations will be made at the CSE meeting, that's grounds for an IE because the evaluator is supposed to provide recommendations, and to say they'll be discussed at the CSE is a cop-out.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left, and I know, Meredith, you had another question, so I'm going to hand the microphone over to you.
I'm asking this question, even though I know the answer, but I think a lot of people in the public don't necessarily know this, which is when you ask for a district review of a special education department, how common or uncommon is that? Because I think a lot of people are questioning, probably looking at, is that necessary? Is that something that we should be spending our taxpayer dollars on? And are other districts in our area or communities in our area undergoing a similar review?
So others might know more, but I know that right now in Chappaqua, there is such an evaluation taking place. I don't know the scope of it, but my understanding is it's pretty broad. It's been done in Greenwich. I know that as well. Does anybody else know any others locally? Bedford. Darien. So these are all places right near us that have done this.
So these things are not uncommon. What varies is the amount of parent participation in setting up the scope and defining kind of the desired results, if you will, right? So often these things are done to kind of just put a seal of approval that the administration needs at that particular time, at that particular place, because of some feedback they received. But what is really a good use of taxpayer dollars is when you do it with the intention of having strong results, with the intention of having a better program than you did several months ago before this began. And that is only accomplished when the people paying the tax dollars and the parents particularly are involved in that process.
Just want to add one quick thing is that sadly, it's becoming more common that the need for this is taking place, whether it be a child who's had a mental illness and as a result there's a tragedy in a school, or it is a child who's been restrained in a classroom and is deceased or seriously injured as a result of this. This is becoming more common, the awareness of this, and we can only hope that it continues to grow in awareness because the sooner we begin to address these problems in a systematic manner, the better it will be for all children in this country.
Unfortunately, what you're saying is true. I've heard of police.
Okay, I have a question from Zoom, and this will be our last question. I am not in your district. It's heartbreaking to listen to this and the parents' problems. Have the parents considered a class action lawsuit against the district?
I'm not a parent of a child in a self-contained classroom who has had to witness trauma or abuse. So I can't speak from their shoes. I can speak as a stakeholder, both as a parent, as a psychologist in the community, and as a parent. We don't want to take our taxpayer dollars and waste them on a class action lawsuit simply because the Board of Education does not live up to its responsibilities. To me, that is a last-ditch effort that costs all of us and really tears a community apart. I think what we're doing here today brings our community together and will help us create the kind of Board of Education so that that does not have to happen. I would not want to see that happen. Is there anyone?
Gosh, I don't know that I would be the best to speak about it, but there apparently is in the works, there is a class action lawsuit in the very preliminary stages regarding reading. It was not born here, but it was born with a local attorney. If Meredith wants to speak further on it, she can. Sure.
Class action suits and special ed are very hard to pull off. The only one I know of in New York or Connecticut recently was a number of years ago in Darien, where the parents did a class action suit and won, but that's because they found a smoking gun that the special ed director put stuff in an email she shouldn't have.
There is a class action being pursued and looked into for children that struggle with reading and dealing with the question about whether school districts are in fact using what the science is mandating or using outdated and disproven factors to continue to teach and invest in programs that have that. It's in its very preliminary stages, but parents that have struggling readers or have dyslexic students are being invited to participate. It's being co-led by an attorney from California who pursued a similar class action lawsuit in California against school districts and won for those classes. The parents did not have to pay anything for that, as the lawyers that participated in it chose to do it pro bono because they were so appalled at what was going on in the school districts and the disregard for the science of reading. So that is being pursued here in New York. There is local counsel.
Okay, we have just a few minutes left, and I just want the microphone to be passed around to the panel for any final thoughts. And if you don't have a final thought, that's fine. You can just pass it on to the next person.
I think I've said enough. I talk too much.
At the end of the day, I think everyone here wants a collaborative process. One, when we send our kids to school or when we contribute our tax dollars to how our schools operate, we want a collaborative process around that. And I think everyone here is seeking that. It is really shocking that our board is not interested in this dialogue. And, we hope that this illustrates how this process should work. And at the end of the day, if there are no changes to how the process works, please use your votes come this spring. The power is in your votes.
I'm heartened by the growing community that we have right now, and I want to see it continue to grow. Ultimately, every single student deserves an opportunity to have a humane, sound education. When we help the special education department, we help the general ed department. Everything works in tandem. One weight brings it all down. We're trying to help every student in every way imaginable, and we're just asking the board to do its job and do the oversight to see to it that that's done. Thank you.
I want to say that there's power in numbers, and let's keep talking to each other. Let's not talk at each other. Let's talk to each other. Let's share our experiences. I thank all of you so much for being here because it means so much to me and to my little boy who is my entire world. And there is so much inside of him that needs to be unlocked. And I know other parents could say the same thing. And so let's keep working towards it. I don't want to give up.
Thank you. Now, I guess what I want to say is, from the beginning, when we started going to board meetings, I think that we've had a fundamental sort of disconnect between, what we sort of expected to see and how they felt that they should respond. And, I think fundamentally we thought, when we brought to light something so painful that the response would be, a very ambitious and very collaborative. And so here we are, but it could still be that, I feel like it could still be that we could all, still choose the way we're going to approach this. And I know there's so much concern about sort of the reputation of the district, but I think the reputation of the district will be built on the response to this, right? Because this is something that happens, as we know, so commonly in so many districts. So the difference is how the administration and how the board responds to it. And it can be a heroic response. It still could be a heroic response. And I just hope to see that.
My closing remark is simply ask questions. If something's not going the way you expected, ask your child's teacher, ask the special ed department, ask the school psychologist, ask the clinical social worker. If your gut tells you that you're not getting an authentic answer, ask somebody else. Keep asking until you feel like you are getting an authentic answer. Call me and ask me. I will I will talk you through it. But don't blindly trust. Keep asking questions until it makes sense.
Abuse of autistic kids in the elementary school, restraints of autistic kids in the middle school, autistic kids put in the basement of the high school. Katona, we have a problem. We need change. This current Board of Education is not equipped or willing or able to make the changes necessary. If you don't believe me, email them, ask them what they've done. They won't answer you. It's not my desire. I don't think it's anyone here's desire to trash the school system. We're very highly ranked, and that's why we moved here, and I want other people to move here. So I hope the takeaway is that, not that we're a terrible district, but that we're a loving, caring community who care about the most vulnerable. Something that I think we don't say enough, but I want to recognize is we have excellent teachers and excellent support staff. And, where my son is right now in his K through 2 class, he has a very good and capable teacher and a loving one-on-one aide. And I want all the kids throughout the district to get what they need. Yeah, we don't want those people to burn out, and we want to make sure they're getting the training that they need. They need constant support and training. So I want any of the teachers listening or the staff or support to know that, we support you. This is more of a systematic issue that we're trying to deal with. But thank you everyone for coming. Don't forget the free tacos.
Okay, on that note, again, a thank you to everyone who came in person. We really appreciate it. We know how hard it is to get away from your home, especially if you have young children. And it's the holiday season. Thank you to everybody who participated on Zoom. And I want to give a special thanks to the woman behind the scenes over here, Deb Golia, who is manning the camera, the Zoom chat, has created our website, our flyers, our business cards. She is like, I don't know if she sleeps, but she has taught herself all of these various things. She is not a graphic designer by trade, and she has just taken it upon herself to get this stuff done and to do it well. And we don't see her up here, but she's really incredible. So one quick note about the free tacos. We will show you how to get upstairs, but because of COVID restrictions, once you've gotten your food, we ask that you either take it and eat it outside where people can take their masks off and breathe and not spread any germs, or bring it home. We're sorry we can't offer a warm indoor place for everybody to congregate and eat, but we want to keep everybody safe. Oh, and also thank you to the church, and thank you to Jack Cabanis, who has been our tech guru today. And I know he's laughing at me saying that, but he's been incredibly helpful. Thank you again for coming. And if you have any questions for us after and you want to talk to us, we'll be around moving the furniture back to where it was when we found it. Thanks.